For a little while now, I've been talking about doing a video where I explain why I have trouble getting into Superman comics. I even filmed a very rough, not at all satisfactory video early in December of last year on this very subject. Then I came down with a sickness for about a week, and by the time I was fully recovered, I kept telling myself, I'll edit that soon, which eventually became, I'll redo that soon, which brings us to here. If you've seen my collection videos, you know that I am not opposed to buying Superman comics, and even though this video is about why I have trouble reading Superman comics, I really enjoy many Superman stories, like Secret Identity by Kurt Busiek, All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison, or Red Sun by Mark Millar. But this is part of the problem. I like certain Superman stories, but this never lasts. It is very telling that none of these stories are really part of the air quotes main DC world. They are all isolated and exist on their own terms, which is fine. I don't really think any of those stories would have the same impact if they were trying to coexist with the rest of the DC universe. But what does this mean for my inability to care about Superman stories? Can I only read and enjoy Superman books that are Elseworlds? Maybe. So what's the reason why? Allow me to compare Superman to Batman for the purposes of this video. It's no secret that I am a huge Batman fan, and I have almost 2 shelves of Batman books to my name. The main era of Batman stories that I like all fall after 1985's Crisis on Infinite Earths, when the editorial staff of DC Comics decided to take all of their comics and start over from scratch. If they didn't like that Batman was raised by his world-traveling uncle in stories from the 50s and 60s, or that Superman had superventriloquism as a superpower, then they could just say that these things never happened. And I think that in the case of Batman, the creators used this to their advantage. Purely by accident, over the course of a decade, the fans began to see a sort of timeline of Batman events unfold in stories set in Batman's early years. If you want to see Batman's career more or less in order, you can do that with a little research. I should reiterate that this was not something that was really planned. Batman Year 1 and Batman Year 2 both came out shortly after Crisis on Infinite Earths, but then other stories like Mad Monk, Monster Men, The Long Halloween, and The Man Who Laughs, they came years later, but they very easily fit into the gaps after Year 1. If you look at the Superman comics from after Crisis, you have the 6-issue Man of Steel miniseries written and drawn by John Byrne. I have made no secret that I do not like this story despite its popularity, but I won't get into why I don't like this story in this video. What is important to note about this story is that, unlike Batman Year 1, it isn't a story about Superman's earliest moments in his career as Superman. It does cover those moments, as well as his youth in Smallville and the explosion of Krypton. But it also jumps forward years and years, so that the last page of the miniseries is set in what was, at the time, the present day. In essence, Man of Steel is trying to cover the entire history of Superman as per Crisis on Infinite Earths erasing so much of it. Fans weren't sure what air quotes counted anymore, so this story essentially told them what did and did not happen to Superman. Batman Year 1 did the same thing, excising elements like Bruce being raised by Joe Chill's mother and his world-traveling uncle, but it kept things tight, if you will. Batman Year 1 was more of a story, while Man of Steel seemed more like a roadmap, explaining to fans and creators alike all of the things that were different with Superman now that we had a relaunch with Crisis on Infinite Earths. But despite having this roadmap, I don't think it really proved to be very helpful for the people at DC Comics. In the decades between Crisis on Infinite Earths and Flashpoint, when DC Comics rebooted once again, the character of General Zod showed up 5 times, and it was a different character each time. When creators wanted to use the character of Supergirl, who, thanks to Crisis on Infinite Earths, never existed, they caused more problems than they were solving by introducing weird shape-shifting aliens who resembled Supergirl, and then later we got fallen angels who were merged with human beings to resemble Supergirl, and then we even got Superman's daughter from the future, until we finally got the Supergirl who was closest to the one that everyone wanted to use this entire time. In the time between Crisis on Infinite Earths and Flashpoint, we even got 4 separate and different Superman origin stories, none of which ever seemed to be able to stick for any length of time. My biggest problem with Superman is that nobody working on Superman can seem to come to a consensus on anything concerning him. Which Zod is the real Zod? Which Supergirl are we going to stick with? Should we just put out another 48 origin stories just in case people want to see the same thing over and over and over again? Let's go back to Batman. We haven't had 4 Batman origin stories that are all contradictory and yet are not really covering new ground. We had 1 Batman origin story in the form of Batman Year One, and then we moved on with other stories. I only wish Superman could have been like this for the past 30 years. In October of last year, a blogger on a website I follow made a brilliant analysis on why Superman isn't working today. I agreed with virtually everything he said, and I will be linking to his article that he wrote in the description of this video below. But to close off this video, I wanted to quote him, as I think what he said is very apt. Scott Lobdell wants to jump into writing Superman with a cannonball splash, but so did Jeff Johns, J. Michael Straczynski, and Grant Morrison, and by now, all the water has been splashed out of the pool. So when Andy Diggle comes aboard with, "Check this out, Superman's abandoned his traditional costume for a black outfit," it means absolutely nothing. End quote. This, I think, is a great way to sum up why I have such trouble getting into Superman. Even after 2 reboots, Crisis on Infinite Earths and now Flashpoint, not counting all of the softer reboots that followed Crisis, the people working on these comics still can't seem to find a tone of consistency for Superman. And to head off any questions, I will still continue to at least try liking Superman. I read the first volume of Grant Morrison's Action Comics that was part of DC's post-Flashpoint relaunch, and I really didn't care for it. I do own George Perez's first volume of Superman from this same relaunch, and I hope that it turns out better. And I will buy the first arc from Andy Diggle's Action Comics, and the first arc from Orson Scott Card's Superman. But, sadly, I am not holding my breath for suddenly finding that Superman is written in such a way that I can read the comics without throwing up.